all for coming out tonight. My name is Ginger Olszewski, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's book launch event for Elizabeth Robin's first full-length collection of poems, To My Dreamcatcher, presented in partnership between the Beaufort Bookstore and our nonprofit Conroy Literary Center. Elizabeth will be in conversation with fellow poet Barry Dickson. The poet Alexander Yucas, author of Tracks, praised To My Dreamcatcher as a wonderfully crafted collection of adventure, acceptance, loss, and rebirth that leaves her readers craving more with the turn of every page. To My Dreamcatcher begins with a bird's journey and winds through encounters with ghosts and dreamcatchers, trees and rushing falls, to a spiritual place inside a painting, the moon, and a national park. As the author travels through her past in the title poem, An Elegy to Her Late Husband, she moves from margins to the page's middle and finds a comfortable place in which to tell her story. Robin retired to Hilton Head Island after a 33-year teaching career to write. She is also the author of 2 chapbooks, Where Green Meets Blue and Silk Purses and Lemonade. In 2021, she won the Carrie McRae Nickens Fellowship and the John Edward Johnson Prize. Her work also appears in Poetry on the Comet, Catfish Stew, the Poetry Society of South Carolina Yearbook, Ripples, Ukulele, Drunk Monkeys, the Roadkill Review, and Local Life magazine. Robin MCs an open mic and partners with arts groups to bring literary programs to Hilton Head Island. Barry Dickson is the author of the poetry collection, Maybe Today. He is a retired Madison Avenue creative director whose poetry and prose have appeared in a variety of journals, including North American Review, Haiku Journal, Pearl Literary Magazine, Hazmat Literary Review, and his favorite, AsininePoetry.com. He's been a finalist for the Hearst Poetry Prize and received special mention for the Pushcart Prize. Barry is currently shopping his next book, Barry Who? 33 Unforgettable Micro-Memoirs from Someone You Never Heard of. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Robin and Barry Dickson.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. About 5 o'clock, I get a little confused. Welcome to the excuse me, to the launch of Elizabeth's full-length collection. Here it is, To My Dreamcatcher. Look at that cover. Is that beautiful or what? And my first question to Elizabeth is, how did you become a poet? What happened? You could have been anything. You wrote mostly prose. You wrote a novel, and then what happened? Does this go way back? Did you just wake up one morning and start writing poetry? Share it with us.
Usually I start that by saying, I don't know. I really don't. I was always thinking of myself as a nonfiction writer. And then life started happening in a lot of ways that I would start to write something that I thought would be an essay or a thought piece, and it would end up being a poem. And after a while, I kind of got into it, and I thought it was interesting. It's a really accessible form to teach, because you can do it in one lesson, one class period. You can really get deeply into one poem and teach all kinds of things from it. So I'd always enjoyed it from that end, but I never thought I'd be constructing one.
Okay. Well, I figured, excuse me, what better way to start? Being the sharp guy that I am, I figured out maybe if we start with a poem on page 1. The very first poem. Imagine. Take it away.
You want me to read Imagine?
Yes.
See now.
It's on page 1, right?
It is. This was inspired by this painting, by the way, by artist Vera Scott, who also did the cover. Imagine. I hear they mate for life, call out to lovers and friends, mark territory in rainforest colors, glowing teal wings, burning orange chests. A deep black beak hook shares dinner with the wife, or grooms her pesky, displaced feathers. Imagine the shock ripped from this community of lovers to an undersized crate marked exotic, Amazon, macaw. Imagine. Cramped minuscularity compels its song, a scream to that lost companion, poachers left behind.
You know, it's interesting that poem makes me, when I first read it, I thought of the word, it's so important in poetry, subtext. It seems like it's just about, trafficking, illegal trafficking, but it's really about so much more.
Mm-hmm.
It's about loss of love. It's about loneliness. It's about man's inhumanity to man, right? or to animals, love of animals, and it's even about separation anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Trying to get contemporary, and that kind of made me think a lot about your book, To My Dreamcatcher, which, unlike your chapbooks, doesn't really have a theme. It's about just about everything. I can tell you that you can open this book and you turn the page and you don't know what's coming next. I mean, like one of your chapbooks had sort of the theme of grief and how to process it. This is, in a good way, all over the place. You don't know. You don't know what it is. What is coming next? Did you have a challenging time trying to figure out what to put where? Because there's an attempt to organize by sections, but there's 52 poems here. How did you do that?
I enlisted all my best poet friends. That's how I did it. I kept, I had put it together. I'm thinking in 2019 I had it together and started submitting it under a completely different title, and was rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected, as we often are. And I felt like the work was good, so I thought there must be something involved with it that was rejecting it that had to do with the way it was put together. So I handed it to people, and actually it's Alex Yucas that gave me the final. Like, he went through it. I don't know how many times he had to read it, but he gave me a lot of really helpful notes on what I might do to rethink it, and put it in a different order, and do some things that made it more accessible. And literally, the next time I submitted, it was picked up. So,
There you go, Alex.
yeah, even the title is his suggestion. I don't know that any writer really does well without writing friends. Sometimes it can be one word. Sometimes it can just be that they tell you something's funny or whatever it is, and you go, okay, it must be working because I meant to be funny. But that's how. It's a lot of help from my friends, not a little.
And then after you do all your work, Alex, and making sure that the order is just right, then people like me come along, and here's how I read a poetry book. I like this, and then they put it down, and then they read it, and they go like this. So, thanks, Alex.
You're welcome.
So, one thing, I don't think I've ever met a poet, including myself, who doesn't sit down at some time or other and go back to childhood and write a poem about that. And there are several of those, if I'm not mistaken. So, how about if I pick out a year randomly and say, read me a poem about that? How about 1966? What do you think?
I could read that one. A little backstory. I lost my mother pretty young, and I've never, ever been able to write about her to this point. This is the only one that I've even been able to. And so it's just kind of interesting. I don't know why this memory popped into my head, but this would be kind of a narrative. It's a true story. 1966. A refrigerator-sized jukebox crammed with oldies makes the diner a destination. We beg Dad for nickels, choose our favorite 3 hits. Mom shimmies her shoulders to the beat. Yow, these boots are made for walking. Into it. And I realize she knows the words. I wonder what that means. This woman wearing bell-bottoms in public, before always in hat, heels, gloves, nylons. I'm talking pre-pantyhose, hitched thigh-high to a garter belt. I am 12, trying to be mom, embrace pop songs, bust past Broadway show tunes and classical piano. 3 years after MLK marches on D.C., 2 since Johnson signed civil rights into law, a year we all sang, the times they are a-changin', and knew what that promised. And here she is, in her broad-striped, colorful pants, glancing, glint in her eye at Dad, belting out that threat to boot trample a man. And Dad's just grinning like he'd enjoy a few deep heel marks. And I wonder what that means. Talk turns to how Nancy has this hit because, well, Frank, she's a middling talent after all, says my mother. And my father just glows and stares.
The title poem, To My Dreamcatcher.
You're not going to make me read that, are you?
Well, it's several pages, so time prohibits.
It takes like 20 minutes.
But we have time to read even more than you picked out. But there is a certain section that you pick up. One of the interesting things about this section is that when Robin, the first I heard, Robin read it to me, and I did not realize that she had switched from poetry to prose. This is a prose section in a regular poem. And it's so well written, I think, so beautifully written, that I thought I was still hearing poetry. So the page you have here, just a piece of To My Dreamcatcher, the title poem.
Okay, yeah,
Page 35.
Yeah. The baseball part. Yeah, my late husband was not into sports really. He was an actor and a director and a teacher, but he loved baseball. And this poem is a lot of dreams that I kept having, repeating. This is one of them. And often you don't understand what something means until you write it down, and then you look at it, and then you realize why it is that it keeps coming to you. So that when I found that, that's when that ended up here, and it ended up in prose, and I don't know why. It just. Last night, I thwacked a baseball under the stadium lights. The ball rose and rose and rose. Stunned, I stared slack-jawed too long before I remembered to run. Of course, I was thrown out at first. I can't swing a bat or run anymore. But the sensation, that sweet connection that blows life wide open, I even felt that the next morning.
So, interrupt with a question.
Uh-huh.
I'm very curious as to how involved the publisher was with the order, with the cover, with picking out which poems to go in, and did the publisher try to change stuff and try to stick their 2 cents into the poem? Because in my book, they did not change a word.
Yeah.
one complaint from the publisher when I tried to put a border around the cover. He called me up and got PO'd at me. Take that border off. But they didn't touch a single poem. In other words, what was your experience?
Well, this is
Tell us about it.
this is my third time working with the same publisher and the same editor, so we have a relationship at this point. So that's nice because it's comfortable. But one thing I learned early is if you have a certain idea of what you'd like to do, and in my case it's generally people I want to include in my project, then I need to make sure that I just hand it to people and go, okay, so here. I've heard of a lot of people, a lot of my friends with Finishing Line Press. In fact, Debbie Lascar, her first chapbook was with Finishing Line Press, and she talked about the arguments that she went into because she wanted to use one of her photographs as the cover of her first book, and they didn't want to use it, and it went back and forth. And I can't even remember whether they actually used it or not. You know how the story ends. But a former student did my first two covers, and I've always loved Mira Scott's art. And so this time I wanted to use hers. And I had no idea what she was going to come up with. And when she shows me this painting that she called it I think it's the Loving Tree, something like that. But I looked at it and I was like, I hadn't even thought about a tree, or I mean, it was odd to me. And I'm not sure they're going to go for this because it doesn't really fit. There's only a couple of poems even that are about a tree. But now it seems like it's the perfect cover, and they loved it. It's the second one. So yeah, so I was really happy about that because they can choose to reject these, and they did the back cover, and Mira does not love what they did to her painting on the back because it's a wrap. This is the left side of the painting, and I don't disagree with her, but it's what they chose to do. They make the rules, right? It's their money.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But yeah, and in terms of content, I would say the only changes that were made in there were copy editing kinds of things, and I think there was one poem that we ended up pulling. It just wasn't, and I knew it. I was just kind of, there's this one poem that's literally been in all three of my books and been pulled from all three of my books. So it just doesn't ever make the cut.
Keep trying.
Well, I like it, but it's just never is up to snuff. So I accept that.
Well, it's good to have publishers who, I kind of lived in fear a little bit that a publisher would call and say, I'd like to make this change in this one poem. And it's something I really didn't want to do. But you got to keep your mouth shut. I mean, you guys publishing your stuff. The next poem made me think about how a poem really, in my opinion, I used to say at work, just to annoy people, I used to say, in my humble, award-winning opinion, a poem has to have maybe meter, sometimes rhyme, good line breaks, but there's one thing I think, I wonder if you'll agree with this, Neil, a poem has to have feeling. Above anything else, if it doesn't have feeling, then you can keep your meter and your rhyme. And I think this poem does. This is on page 24, and it's called Sound of Water.
It's funny that I took this ridiculously long trip in 2018, and the pictures from that trip often come up on my Facebook memories. So I reposted this just the other day because they're all the pictures of the various bodies of water where I was when I wrote this poem. I wrote this in basically it was in the Targhee National Forest in Idaho. and you're staring across the river at the Grand Tetons, and it's a pretty amazing little stretch of the country. Anyway. The sound of water. I listen at lower falls today, a rush of autumn leaves, a steady ocean surf, breaking over a distant reef. And I hear his voice in a whisper. At Upper Falls, he roars a concerto in B flat, soft breeze and songbirds falling into harmony. A hissing mist rises above. Percussion? What aria does he sing in his crystalline tenor? That voice shakes me still, a rumbling love song, just to me. At Fish Creek, water laps, soft yet insistent, a constant humming, come to me. Sirens may lure and kill, but the danger is his song inside the water. Music calling me back, the pull as magnetic as the moon's, plays everywhere. Where I made the first edit.
What'd you take out?
It's twice.
It's good.
Drives me crazy.
You
when I
never
do that.
stop. You never stop editing. Well, my next question is going to be introduced by one of my own poems. I'm sneaking one in on you. It's not in here. But the question really is, where do ideas come from? I get this all the time. I bet you get it all the time. How'd you think of that? So I have one attempt that I made. I think this will introduce the topic. At explaining, people say to me, where'd you get that idea? This is called the poet's existence. There is stuffed into the unconscious. Every now and then, for no apparent reason, without warning, completely on its own, a leak occurs. A poem spills out. We are the anti-plumber. We do not fix leaks. We pray for them. This is the life of the poet, just wandering around, trying to spring leaks. So, that's the question.
That's
What
the
is your
question.
what is your thinking on where do we get these ideas? Where does it come from?
It's so random, isn't it? I mean, it's so something. Well, I'll be, walking Byron, and something will come into my head, a phrase sometimes,
That's a leak.
something, and I'll go, that's pretty good. That's a great idea. I mean, I remember when some lines came into my head, and I'd be like, and then I couldn't let it go. And then you're like, okay, that's going to end up in a poem somewhere someday. And you just put it in your journal and you leave it. And then you get a collection of them sometimes, and then all of a sudden, I know where I'm going with this. Who knew? And, it happens. Sometimes, though, there's some kind of trigger, right? There's some moment or event. I mean, Sound of Water, I was in a really bad place at that point in my life. And sometimes writing it out helps you to move out of that place. And it was a place I needed to move out of. It was the whole reason I was on that 20,000-mile trip. And I was already in Idaho, and I still hadn't managed to get myself out of it. So, you got to get on the stick there. So sometimes, and the whole thing will come out pretty much, although I revise a lot, so it's not verbatim, And sometimes it'll be an event, something triggers it. That's, you witness something and you feel, you see it in a certain way that you feel like maybe you need to express that. there are a lot of different ways that it happens.
You do a lot of poems that are based on actual experiences.
Yes, I do. Which hopefully you don't know.
And are you ever surprised by the way a poem turns out from where you thought it was going when you sat down and started to write?
I'm always surprised. That's when I know I've got a poem and not just angst on the page. That's when I know. It's when I'm surprised. It's like, whoa, I didn't know I thought that. I didn't know that's how that was going to work. It's when all of a sudden you find something that's completely fresh and different, and you're like, oh, I think that's worthy of a poem.
There is a famous critic whose name escapes me now, who said, a poet should never have an ending in mind and write into an ending, which I completely disagree with. Because what the critic is trying to say is, you leave yourself open to surprise. You know, if you don't know what the ending is, you come up with something that's wonderful. But sometimes if you have an ending, it's the story that leads into it that's the surprise. So I disagree with that. But there are people who think you should never have an ending in mind when you do a poem.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of them. Okay.
I don't ever know what I have in mind.
There's
I
the
just
surprise.
get to a point where I can't let something go. I'm just on it, and I just can't let it go. I just keep working on it until I find out what in the world it is that I'm thinking. Why is this bothering me so much, right? There must be something here.
Do you find it when you're finished, you feel better? Actually feel cleansed and uplifted?
Well, definitely with all of those grief poems, all of that, working through those pieces of my life, that's what got me started into poetry. It was the only way to navigate so much tragedy at once, and since all of us have enjoyed tragedies in our lives, I know you know what I mean. It's like until you figure out a way through it, you're not going to feel better. You're not going to really be able to move forward in any meaningful way. So those poems definitely. Sometimes I have this smoke satisfaction when I'm writing with the political poems. Yeah. I nailed that one.
Well,
That everybody disagrees with me.
what a coincidence that you happen to bring that up.
Oh.
Because I'm just going to name the next poem, the one on 65, called The Stunt.
You can that one. Okay. So this one was inspired by an actual news thing that I saw. That you'll understand because it's what I lead the poem with. The stunt. Jumping without a parachute, 25,000 feet. Really happened. Landing in deft backflip onto netting, a square akin to aiming at a postage stamp. That improbable feat may explain trusting any weaned on half-truths or voting in a confidence man. Like the mother saying, there, it'll be all right, cuddling her terminal child. I love you goes a long way. Check the box for the alternative fact that pretends kindness, or the one preaching apocalypse. And like that jumper, either bounce or break, but do it for the spectacle.
Voting in a confidence man.
Well, I never named names.
Something tells me it's about a certain president, and it's not William McKinley.
You know what? It is and it isn't. It is, but also we seem to have a lot of politicians that aren't doing we would possibly like them to be doing. We've got stuff that needs fixing. We could start with potholes. We could. We've got stuff that needs fixing, and there's all this other stuff going on that I don't think it's what most of us asked for. And a lot of it's problematic.
Well, throughout history, if you've been reading poetry, you know that just about every poet writes somewhere along the line about courtship. What a perfect subject for poetry. There's been so many great poems about courtship. And I think there's some of that on page 48, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that the title?
It might be. It's the Charleston one.
Charleston
Yeah.
Courtship.
What inspired this poem was a tour of, I don't know if I know how to pronounce this name, Joseph Manigault House. It's across from the Charleston Museum on Meeting Street in Charleston, and recommend it. It was built in 1803. It's kind of interesting. It was built in that period, and they had to have everything be like symmetrical. So if there's a window here, there has to be an opposite window that's exactly in the same spot. Except if you're inside the house, a lot of those are fake windows. They're not at all. So it's a very weird idea, I think. I mean, if you're going to have a window, it might as well be a window, right? On the outside, on the, I guess it was on the portico, or it might have been in the yard, there was something called a joggling board. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. For me, that was my first joggling board, and I didn't know anything about it or what it was. So of course, I started researching it, and this poem happened. A Charleston Courtship. They sit on opposite ends of a joggling board, guard positions, bounce by jiggle inch to a middle mingle. Each jounce costs symmetry. The balance in solitude breaks. Bricked windows, false doors, protect hearts, but such facades mask a real danger. The unrisked miss quaking, unbroken touching, lose the shared awe in a swollen moon. Vast stretches of green marsh, grasses or bamboo forests, the beauty stuffed into spring, bursting. Like the Spanish moss that drapes his trees, the Charleston man clings, but takes nothing away, granting she resist or allow the gravity that pulls. Supple hands play her spine like a fretboard, jolt her closer. She walks the morning surf, remembers fingers sliding from steel guitar to her, jostled hearts beating in the time.
So I'm sitting in my living room one day, and I go to put on CNN, which on my TV is 33, but I guess I must have only hit one of the 2 3s. And all of a sudden the local channel comes on, WHHI. And I swear to you, this is true. Out of the clear blue sky. What's on TV? But Elizabeth Robin and Barry Dickson on the screen there. I could. It was the complete. It was. Then it cut to Jonathan.
Oh, you.
Jonathan was promoting this event.
I'm the guy from
I just
TV.
happened to accidentally put it on. And there's Jonathan from the Conroy Center, sitting right here, saying it should be a good combination because Robin, Elizabeth, is serious and Barry's kind of funny. And it's going to be magical. And it got me thinking.
We think this is a very unfair assessment.
Well, it can be pretty funny too. So if you all turn in your hymnals to 56,
Oh, am I funny on
and there's a
56?
poem that I think is amusing, like I say, in my humble award-winning opinion, that Robin's going to read for us now.
Must be nice to be an award-winning
Yeah, well, to give yourself one is nice.
Yeah, this one, I think this is one that all of us can relate to in one way or another. When you've got this like perfect day planned, and the world ruins it immediately. So yeah, when a lawnmower interrupts, almost as if by design, just as I lay out the juice, the carefully constructed wrapped sandwich at the empty picnic grounds, just as I sit, breathe in the green quiet, theme song of brook, breeze, just as I contemplate the words to capture heaven. Just then, the workman rumbles in a truck, rattles equipment down ramps, and roars through my poem.
Love the part where you say the poem was about to capture heaven. And he interrupted me. It was probably going to be the greatest poem ever written.
It was. And instead it ended up being that.
The next poem that I would like Robin to read makes me think about the fact that there are things that are mundane. We've heard about them all the time, and you don't kind of pay attention. And then a talented poet gets a hold of it and changes the way you see it completely. And this, for me, was an example of that. On page 55, Robin.
In my book?
In your book.
Huh.
Yeah. This is, we've all heard about people who move a lot during childhood. It's the so-called army brat thing, which I've heard about, many times. And I noticed that people who do move about a lot, they get a little uncomfortable when you ask them where they're from. And I quit asking. But after reading this poem, I understand it much better now. Please share it with it.
I guess I should explain, I was a Navy brat. So I've never known how to answer that question. Adaptation. Noun. A change by which an organism or species becomes better suited to its environment. Most creatures know it's move or die. The dragonfly dips and darts, sometimes strafing the lagoon. Silver wings soar, dive, shoot into bushes. Hummingbirds blur in rapid hover and zoom, suckered by nectar, lured flower to flower. The shark, minus a swim bladder, paddles even in sleep. Restlessness, exploration, rule. I avoid excess baggage, pack light, clothes rolled and wrinkle free, Navy style. No one taught me how to stay put. A hometown, roots, as foreign as living on Neptune, of speaking Cantonese to the town shaman, right up there with having friends for life. Only humans mark hometowns, wonder first, where are you from? Live years steeped in tradition, an accent, regionalisms, while I collect a series of restive stays, awaiting departure.
One of my favorite Elizabeth Robin poems, and apparently you think highly of it too, in the sense that you took it separately from the whole book and put it on the Roman numerals on the page in clouds.
Yeah.
Did you read that?
Yeah, I was getting it together by now. I was in Big Bend in Texas at this point. And for those of you that are bird watchers, you'll be ashamed of me. I always have to ask Mika what things are, because I never know what a bird is. I know a cardinal. A robin. I know a robin.
There you go.
Yeah, they have to be like really obvious for me to know what they are. In clouds. A bird appears in silhouette, So high it dances with the clouds, milky and swirling. Its circles seem lazy, looping without purpose. At first, concentric laps, then figure eights, oval meanderings, higher and higher. I look away and lose sight. Think, did it dive, disappear inside a cloud? I never know. Even the cloud, substantial only minutes, dissolves. This bird, so distant, always traveling, I can't identify, but I know this journey.
I am an avid golfer, and I have never written a single word in any poem about golf. I've quit writing a poem and gone out and played golf, but Robin is a pianist. Are you not?
No.
You were. But you were.
I play the piano.
Okay, well, anyway.
I play.
On page 41, something tells me this is about more than a piano. Talk about subtext. Okay, piano forte.
You figured it out. Yeah, I think my mother signed us up for piano lessons. I was 6 and my brother was 8. When we had just moved to Naples, Italy. And I think part of it was a way to access a lot of Italian, which we learned while we lived there. So that was a fun side benefit. And I'm sure that's what this is about.
Okay, well.
Pianoforte. Play with me in supple finger strokes. Tap me softly, ripple up and down. Pianissimo, pianissimo. Then clench me in great corded fists. I may mute or shout in volume. Fortissimo, fortissimo. I might be the soundboard you need to tune when the pedal's pressed just right. Oh, true, I'm expensive, demand space and attention, but I sing any key or position. Stand me upright and vibrate my strings, or baby, grand, spread out, lift my lid off and watch those hammers drop, bang and hum in cocktail black and ivory waves, scaling melodic walls, andante, lento, staccato, crescendo, bravo, bravo, bravo. I don't know. There's a blues song called Handyman. If you're a blues fan, you know it. And on one level, it's all about the chores that a gentleman is doing to take care of his lady's household. But they might not be chores.
Well, the word subtext flashed into my mind again. Talk about subtext. They say Robert Frost's poems are really great because of their subtext, but Elizabeth Robin's poems have wonderful subtext too. Let's go to the last poem in the book. Okay.
Okay.
And what was very interesting to me about this, they tell you don't do things that are hackneyed or familiar that we've all heard about before, come up with fresh stuff. This poem is proof to me that you can take a familiar subject, and if you put it in the hands of a good poet, there's always a fresh way to approach something. We've all seen the idea of the blank page, the writer staring at the white page. We've heard that many times. But take the idea of the piece of paper with nothing on it and give it to Robin, and you get a whole fresh angle on it. And it's the last poem in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I dedicated this to my friend Nicole, who unfortunately took her own life. Paper thin for Nicole. Paper comes with rules, size and shape, lines spaced in precision, marching down 11 lockstep inches, ruled. No variation accepted, 1-inch margins expected. Only holes wiggle from none, 3, or 5, identical in size, as though every hole measures equally. What spills on each page proves a different truth. Messy stains, altered pulp, fading margins, words bust right through. Proof some lines can't hold, and holes can punch you. I choose unlined sheets, letter paper, blank, grain textured, deckled in pale shades, lively patterns, and to escape the margins others draw to shrink my story.
Well, we've heard the first poem, which is Imagine, which was Imagine, and then the final poem, Paper Thin. So you want to talk a little bit about the arc of the book? Thoughts
Okay.
about arc?
Yeah, I am telling a story. It's a story about finding a way forward, really. It's a story about, you talked about not wanting to do something trite, and of course, I use the word journey in clouds. That's the preface to the whole book, and that's a very trite thing to do. But I know this journey is like, I've thought about dropping that line 1,000,000 times, but I can't because
Don't.
it's it is what it is, right? It's just, sometimes it's what you need. But the journey was, I go through, struggling with the various things that we all struggle with in life, whether it be, the terrible things that you see other people do to other people, or the terrible things that happen to you in a personal way, or whatever it might be, and how you work your way through that, and how and why we find people that we love and that are meaningful to us, and why those friendships are important and meaningful and make life worth living, and also the energy that it takes to be yourself and not allow anyone to change that. So that's the story arc.
Mhm.
For what it's worth.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any questions for either of us?
I have a question.
For Robin.
I have one.
Okay.
You talk about Robin. First of all, I enjoyed everything that you read, and I enjoyed your moderation there. That was very, very much appreciated. You're talking about writing from experience, okay? And I live with a writer, and I don't know these things, right? Okay. So you're writing from experience. Do you ever sit down and write, or write a poem, and you stop and you back away a moment and you say, wait a minute, that's not a poem, that's a rant, or that's not a poem, that's a confession. Or from a writer's perspective, is that one and the same?
I have this file that's probably now about this thick of those. Yeah, stuff that's really terrible. No one knows it's there except me. And I keep it just because it's possible that there will be some line in there somewhere that ends up being worth keeping. But most of the poems, it's not a poem. It is a rant. Yeah. Because, sometimes you get upset.
Sure.
You write things because you're upset. You write things because you just want to. This was important. I need to write it down. I have something to say. And then you find that it's pretty empty.
Thank you.
I've had the experience of that, and looking at it saying, this doesn't work. And I put it away, and 5 years later, I look at it, I find it, and I say, wait a minute, what the hell was wrong with that? That's pretty darn good. Actually, the poet's existence I found in a folder on my computer that said not working.
Yeah.
What was I thinking that day? It's okay. It's not.
I call them loose poems.
Do you ever get the thought that you can't tell the difference? You don't know which ones are the good ones and which ones aren't?
I mean, everything needs to be like put aside. Even the ones you think are good could end up being rotten once you really
Yes.
look at them. You know, like, you know how it is in anything. When you're in the moment, this is a really good idea. You know, every teenage boy has experienced this. This is a really good idea. I think this is what we should do. It turned out to be not a really good idea. Hopefully they didn't do it, or they didn't get caught. So yeah, there's that. But you know, the danger in that is either your taste improved and now you understand that what you wrote was brilliant and you just set it aside because you didn't understand that at the time. You were too young. Or your taste has deteriorated over time. I have no idea what's decent. So there's a
Pretty
danger
funny.
in that.
Pretty funny. Anybody else? Comments? Questions? Confrontations? Edit suggestions? No?
A lot of things you have to sleep on.
Mm-hmm.
John?
It's kind of a marvelous presentation. And that last poem is just terrific. I think you were nibbling around this, Robin, at one point, and you kind of mentioned there was a word in a poem that had puzzled you. You've taken it out, you put it back in. So the question is, how often do you wake up in the middle of the night, particularly once you've set it in stone, the book is published, and wake up and say, oh my gosh, I wish I could have done this, I wish I could have changed that? Or have you kind of learned to discipline that and say it's done, it's launched, on to the next project? Do you ever have kind of a writer's remorse, kind of specific?
Oh, probably daily.
Daily. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, there are whole lines that when I go back into the old books, there are whole lines I've dropped in the book. There's a person I won't name, although she's present at the moment, who is really good at teaching me to get rid of things that I don't need, and it's been a process. She must be tired of the struggle, but it's interesting how sometimes it'll be a line that she told me to get rid of, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, she was right. I don't need that line. Like 5 years later. So, yeah, that happens.
I would just say that, sort of in response to that, one of the things that I loved, you just published this. This is almost still act, and you were editing as you read, and I loved that. There were at least 2 poems that you changed on the fly, and I thought, oh, she does it too, because I'm constantly editing, and I think, I wonder how other people, how does an artist know they're making their stuff? How does the person know their book is done? If I can't even do it with a few lines in a poem.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of working here. Really, I mean, I don't know whether you're going to like it, but I'm really proud of it. It says what I wanted to say and it did what I wanted to do. And sometimes I think, for me anyway, it shows I'm still growing as a poet. I'm still learning. I'm still pushing. And that, you know, when I don't feel that way, that's when I'm going to stop. You know, that's when I'm going to stop. So far, you know, I feel really good about it. But that doesn't mean you sit there and go, well, I'm just all that. That, you know, I'm perfect now. You know, I mean, that's what that would imply. If you don't ever see anything that needs improvement, then you think you're perfect. And that's a really interesting position to take in your life. I'm not sure. I don't know, Treva, you're an artist.
I was just thinking, relating the same thing to
How
our
do you
work.
decide when you're going to sell that painting instead of,
When you feel good about it,
yeah?
yeah, internally.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it
I'm
is.
working on one now,
It is a
and
feeling.
my husband said, I've never seen you spend so much time on one painting because I keep revisiting
Mhm.
it.
It's not right yet.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the same. I mean, different medium completely. I could never do what you do, but yeah, it's the same thing.
I think there's a strong correlation with writing and creating art. And,
Any creative.
right, right.
And writing is inspired by art, which is one of Elizabeth Robin's favorite subjects, ekphrastic poetry,
Yeah.
which we don't have time to get into this evening. Is there poetry, is there art that's inspired by writing? Is the reverse of ekphrastic?
Yeah,
Is there a name for that?
I'm not being the scholar that the rest of you are. I will wait and see who can answer that question.
yeah.
Well, folks, I could tell you that if you don't have a copy of this book already, get one. They're available at the cash register. It's really terrific.
As is yours.
Thank you. We're actually,
Today.
both of
Yeah.
our books are available. We'll sign, but especially this one. It's hot off the presses. And I figured out there's 52 poems in here, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it ended up being.
Come on, it's 38 cents a poem.
You did that math?
Yes, I actually did. And I've also figured out that mine comes out to over $1 a poem. There's only 25 poems in there, but it's a chapbook. It's not a full-length collection.
There's this meme on Facebook right now that's a librarian who's come out and said, okay, who keeps putting the math books in the horror section? That's me.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Us.
Oh, one more question.
One more
I'm sorry.
question. As much as I thoroughly enjoyed all of that, you've got me so damn curious about the one poem that got dropped from all three of your books. So can you at least tell us, is it because it was controversial?
No.
Or is it because
No, it's actually
it
funny.
didn't fit with the rest
Yeah,
of the
it's-
collection?
It's supposed to be funny. The title
Ah.
is a picture worth 100 words. And it's a 100-word poem.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's just supposed to entice you better than the picture can.
It
And
sounds
I-
like ekphrastic, isn't it? Ekphrastic?
No. No, it's just me. And I think it's funny. I love that little poem, but it just never makes it in. But no, the publishers seem to like it when I do I'm more one to step back from the political ones. Like I write a lot of them, but I don't always want to be public with them. Get the target on your back then. Yeah. Well, sometimes I do. I mean, that's why I signed off really well. But,
Well, thanks for coming, folks. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Read it.
Thank you.